Welcome to the Recap Book Chat. We are a mother and daughter duo
conversing about books over a cup of joe.
seeking truth to help us glow.
Ready, set, let's grow!
And welcome to the Recap Book Chat. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today we are continuing our conversation about the book called The Next Conversation. Argue Less and Talk More by
Jefferson Fisher, our favorite trial attorney, other than maybe Matlock, which...
our Texas.
Yes, very
Texas
good.
boy.
Texas trial lawyer, and he's an honest lawyer, which that in itself might be an oxymoron, kind of like an honest used car salesman. But let's recap what we talked about in Chapter 1. What was the main gist of Chapter 1?
The main gist, I feel like, was
Never win an argument.
that's right.
See, that's why we recap. That is so important to just recap.
Well,
Never win
I
an
remember the
argument.
story, the Bobby Lepre, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
okay, what's the point of the Bobby Lepre story? But yes.
Well, the whole book is worth, the Bobby Lepre story is worth buying the book. I mean, it is such a powerful story. And his story with Evan, tutoring Evan too, because he says, there was a quote in there that I don't know that we covered, but somewhere Jefferson said he lived in a world that I was not a part of, that I didn't know, that I didn't understand. And that's why we read, which that's what's so powerful about what we're trying to do is explode the love of reading, because that's how we get that. That's how we can get a glimpse into someone else's world that we're not a part of. And what does that build? Compassion. That's what Jesus did. Boots on the ground. Jesus is down there with the people. He's eating with them. And that's huge. If the only people you're spending time with are people just like you are not growing, my friend. You have to spend time with people that make you uncomfortable. And that's what Jefferson spends his whole life doing, that, which is amazing. But never
What do they say?
win an argument.
They say we should always have a hand reaching forward to someone who's at kind of the next level that we want to get to, a mentor or someone we look up to. So have that relationship reaching forward, and then always have that relationship reaching back, someone that you're pouring into who wants to get to where you're at. So if we live our life connected that way, always continuing to grow and always helping someone.
Yes, because first of all, and I think this is powerful in whatever relationship you have, but what is said is not what is felt. And the person I'm talking to is not always, I don't see what's inside,
Mm-hmm.
And that's why if I'm trying to win an argument, I have something which goes with the next conversation, Chapter 2. It's have something to learn, not something to prove. And that's why it's good to recap, because now that builds on that. And if I learn something about you, well, I can learn something else, and that's how you grow a relationship. But if I prove something, that's very shallow, actually, when you think about it.
Well, and remember Jamie Winship, going back to what he said, if you're self-protecting or self-promoting, you're living in a false identity. So really, if we go in trying to prove something, that's out of a false identity. That's not our authentic self that God created us to be. So that's a good indicator. If we feel like we need to prove something, we need to step back and reevaluate. Okay, I'm not in my real identity. I'm trying to self-promote. So.
And that is, the thing is, I think, and the more you read, the more you see that. I just finished the book Edenbrook, which is a fabulous read. But in there, she's a twin sister, and she thinks she's like a tomboy, kind of like Emma M. Lyon. She does not think very well of herself, but she's comfortable with herself, kind of like Emma, But her twin sister's beautiful and all of this. So her twin sister is self-promoting because she's the center of attention. And whereas Marianne, that's her name, I wanted to call her Emma through the whole book, but it is Marianne. She's not. She's just like, she loves to paint. She loves the outdoors and very comfortable in her own skin. And that's what the guy said about Emma M. Lyon. He said, "There are girls in this room that would like to be you because you like being you,
Mhm.
and you should."
Authentic.
Yeah. And that's easy to spot. If you like being you, then, and I think that's what you won't have to promote yourself. And there's a difference between realistic goals of a conversation and unrealistic goals. One thing we forgot to talk about was when you first meet someone and then the next. Remember what you said about that? That the next conversation is more important than the initial
Yes.
conversation.
I love that Jefferson talked about that. That he said that, yes, the next conversation is more important than the first, and a lot of times, we put so much weight on first impressions, and I do
Mhm.
think they're important. I do think it's good to present yourself well, but I love that he said that because we will make mistakes, and it doesn't always depend on that initial conversation. The next conversation is more important than that one because the next one, you can fix those mistakes that you made. You can
Mhm.
kinda set the record straight. You can show up better. You can maybe you were trying to prove something in that first one and you catch yourself. Well, the next one, I wanna learn something. I don't
Mhm.
need to prove anything. So you can make those adjustments, and so I love that mentality that it's not all or nothing. It's not the first one and then it's done. No, it's a growth mindset. You're going to make mistakes, but he's giving us the tools how to get to the next conversation and make those corrections, how to make those fixes. And like you said, that's the main goal is have something to learn rather than something to prove. And he talks about why it's important for your conversation to have goals. So there's a lot of goals. You could say, listen without getting defensive. You could say, but these goals need to be kind of about you because you
Mhm.
can't really control the other person. And he talks about how a lot of times we will have these imaginary conversations where we've played out a whole scenario in our head. And when it doesn't go that way in person, we don't know what to do because it didn't go the way we'd planned it. And so we just kind of like, well, we get angry, we back out.
Well,
So
I'm thinking of a Hitch quote. The quote from Hitch says, "I saw that going differently in my mind." That's what Will Smith is saying. But this is Jefferson's actual words. Yes, initial conversations, like meeting someone for the first time and making that first impression, are important. But it's the next conversation that tests whether your first impression will remain a lasting one. The job interview, the first date, the initial meeting, everyone has their guard up. Everyone is on their best behavior. Over time, the shine wears off, and the person you thought you knew may turn out to be someone completely different. So, and that is so true because sometimes you meet someone and you're like, oh, kindred spirit, kindred spirit. And then you go, maybe not. I was in jail, in the jail lesson yesterday. I ask everyone their favorite movie because I said, really, you can tell a lot because if people are not readers, if you ask their favorite book, you could do that too. But movies easier. I am sorry, but it is. One of the ladies said Alice in Wonderland was her favorite. And another one said That Thing You Do. And she said, "You probably never heard of that." Yeah, I have heard of that movie. But Alice in Wonderland, she had a specific rendition of it, not the old one, not the new one. It's like the middle, you know. But it's interesting because that says a lot about you. Your favorite. I mean, if someone told me their favorite movie was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'd be going like, "Whoa, okay." But yes, have something to learn, not something to prove. I think that's huge. And your realistic goals. Just think about that. And you're looking at what can I do, not about the other person, because you cannot control anyone except and we have trouble controlling the person in the mirror. But certainly we can't control anyone but that person in the mirror.
well, and he talks about your goals aligning with your values, and everyone's values are
Mhm.
gonna be different. And we don't even know our values a lot of times because we don't self-reflect. We don't think about it. And he gives some questions that you can ask your spouse or someone close to you
Mhm. I
to
haven't
help
done
you
that.
to help you kind of flesh out some of those
Mhm.
things.
Yes, he
So,
says to poll a close friend or a spouse about your values and your character and ask, like, "What do you think's important to me?" And that's being very vulnerable because he said that that will show you the image that you're projecting. And I'm like, "Whoa."
it's
And
actually pretty fun. I did it
He
with mine.
shares Oh, you did? Okay, well,
Mhm.
share what happened. I did not do that. Yeah,
Well,
tell us
try
what happened.
well, you need to try it. So just
Try that and follow me.
yeah, so try that. But it is fun because again,
Well, that would depend on who I ask. I mean, your dad, might at certain times, it would be
but
different, but
again, it's revealing even if you don't feel like you portray yourself that way, it's interesting to see how other people are
yeah.
interpreting you.
I liked also what he said, how when people say, "Are we good?" and everybody says, "Yes." Well, he says, "If you're not good, then if honesty is one of your values, then you say, 'I still don't feel like I'm being fully heard on my end.'" And that this morning, your dad and I, we were having a discussion. I said, "You're saying you. You're supposed to be saying I, because you don't know how I'm feeling. You have to say I statements." So yeah, Jefferson's gotten me in a little bit of trouble, but I mean, we're good now. But so I'm definitely telling you it works. But because I said, and then when I said you need to say I, he could not think of anything to say because he was full of you statements, and then he had to think for a long, and then he said, I don't know what to say. So I said, well, you need to be self aware. But yeah, when it was not about me coming from what's wrong with me, what I need to fix,
It's
you
so
know.
much easier to see flaws in other people than ourselves. It's so much easier to blame than to take responsibility for ourselves. So that's good. And
Yeah, I am. Mhm.
it's hard going back to what you said. When someone's ready to end the conversation, it is so hard to be honest. Or for me,
Mhm. Mhm. Oh,
if you struggle
totally.
with like people pleasing, because you know the person wants to end the conversation. And so to be honest and say, I appreciate what you said and I'm hearing you, but I don't feel like I'm being heard. That's really hard to
Mhm.
be that's very vulnerable, that's very honest. But I do feel like you are letting them feel the weight of who you are. You're being true to your values, true to yourself, but you're also saying that you do care about the relationship, that
Mhm.
you want the relationship to be good. And that, to me, is more important than comfort, which it's more
Mhm.
comfortable when someone wants to end it to say, okay, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Well, I
But
mean,
then you have
that's a
bitterness inside.
kind of a pressure statement. "You good?" And they're walking away, "You
Hmm.
good? We good?" And then, and for you to be brave enough, I think you have to be brave too. I'm listening to this book, The Five Wishes of Mr. Murray McBride. And in there, this little girl and her mom always say SBK, SBK, SBK. And they hug each other and then they say SBK, SBK. Well, Murray McBride is 100 years old. And he's an old curmudgeon of a character that you just absolutely love. And he said, "What's with this SBK? What's that about?" And they were in an abusive they had an abusive father and or husband both. And so when that came to a head, their mantra, which is what he's talking about here, was we are strong, we are brave, we are kind. And SBK is strong, brave, and
Oh,
kind. And I
I love
think
that.
that transfers very well to what he's saying. We're going to be strong. That's my values, to be strong, brave, and kind. Well, in the course of events, something tragic happens, and then Mr. Murray McBride is saying, SBK, SBK, I have to be. And it gets him going. He's 100 years old, but he said, I will be strong. I will be brave. I will be kind. And in
Great
Jefferson's,
connection. Great connection.
well, it goes with his first mantra. His is, where there is room for kindness, I will use it.
Ooh.
And then tell me who I am without saying my name. And if I can't be a bridge, I'll be a lighthouse.
Ooh.
And these are the values that help him to align with every communication that he has. So if you have those values set down, if we're a Christian, they're done. If you are fully committed to Christ, then the heavy lifting is done for you. I mean, you don't have to say, do I do this? There's not that internal struggle because we know, we want to align with what God has. So your values make the tough decisions for you. I love that.
You don't have to think you've already made a decision. The decision's been made. It's just executing it.
But you
It's
do
almost
have
like
to
those
think about it.
yeah, it's almost like, the fire drills. You do
Mhm.
you make a decision, you know, "Okay, this is where we go in a fire drill," you practice it, and then if it comes up, you don't have to wonder, "What do I do? What?" It's like, "We planned for this is what I do."
So, to recap this is like you're going to come to a time where it'll be a long day. Maybe you've had some things go wrong. Like your brother said, he was struggling with this third job that he has. And I said, well, you know what they say, you never quit on a bad day. And he said, but what if you don't have a good day? Because that third job's killing him, and that there is that day where you feel like, well, I don't have the bandwidth to learn something. I'm just going to prove something. Well, I would challenge us all that learning and proving probably takes the same amount of energy. But we think if I just prove my point, then end of story. But is that really true? I mean, I think it's takes just as much energy. I used to tell the kids that in class. It takes just as much energy, from what I could see as a teacher, to fake read than really read. Because
True.
that they're looking and then they're looking up at me and then they're looking down and looking up at me. I'm saying, okay, that's a lot of energy to fake it. And the kids that get lost in the magic of reading, they don't even know. When the timer goes off, they're like, "What? What happened? 30 minutes? You're kidding me." And I have to explain that, but most everybody gets on board finally. But the energy of these people faking it to me, that's tiring.
So let's unpack the "if I can't be a bridge, be a lighthouse." What does that mean?
Well, I think when you think about it, you might not be able to bridge a gap. Let's say there's two people, and he talks later on about these two sisters. I think it was, that there was maybe you can't build a bridge, you know, like Simon and Garfunkel had a song, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. Well, maybe this bridge is broken, and you just can't bridge these troubled waters, but you can shine a light. So, because the Bible says we're supposed to be salt and light. So, even without a bridge, a light brings people together because we're all seeing the same thing. So, we are brought together, but maybe not as close as. And I think that would be his rendition of realistic expectations. Because, haters are going to hate and you can't fix them. I mean, this one sister had been that way her whole life. So it's kind of like in the Emma M. Line series, if anybody's read that, you're not going to change Aunt Eugenia because that's how she is. I don't expect her to change. I don't expect Archibald, cousin Archibald. There's some people, but you can still be the light. Emma can be the light. She can do what's right. She can do what she can. Will she be their bosom buddy? No, she won't be. But yet she can still be a light. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. Thank you for unpacking that. I think that's great. I love what you said too about the fixing thing. I think he hit on that too, that the unreal I should say the unrealistic expectations that we have with conversations. And I know been guilty of this, thinking that this conversation will fix it. Will fix it in one conversation. And the issue could have been months or years in the making. We're not gonna fix it in one conversation. That's unrealistic to have that as a goal, and that's only gonna cause more hurt, disappointment, and it's not going to help the relationship. So I love that you pulled that out, and really, again, we can only control ourselves, and so we can't fix someone else, but we can control how we respond to whatever is going on. And I feel like the same mentality I'm working on with just like household stuff. I want the one and done. I'm going to clean my closet and it will always stay good. I'll declutter. I'll do a massive decluttering on a Saturday and then I don't want to do it ever again. That is not sustainable. And I feel like we have the same thing with conversations. I want to fix it and be done with it because it's messy. It's uncomfortable. I don't want to have to talk about it again. But that's not sustainable. So
Well said. Yeah, I do think we do. I am right there with you with the one and done. I mean, I'll do it. I'll bite the bullet. I'll eat that frog. I'll do that. And then, do I want to do it again next month? No, I don't. But if it was just part of our routine, Like, when you said the only person we can control is self, that's a tall order, though. Self control. I see why that was the fruit of the spirit named last, because you're thinking, oh, love, I can love, joy. Yeah, yeah. Self control. Oh, wait a minute. Back the truck up, because that's the one when when I teach that lesson in Sunday school, that's the one people have trouble with. I said, what does that look like? And they're like, all the rest of them, quick example. I mean, and then we were drawing a little symbol with it and all that kind of stuff. When we get to self-control, the lesson just goes like, well, because like you said, you link the comfortable. And I think that is where we are. Like, what is comfortable? We don't like to be uncomfortable. And it is, but really the times when you had uncomfortable conversations, that's where deep growth takes place. And that's where when someone's vulnerable, those friends of mine who we just share all, well, man, so we're so close. You can almost communicate without even talking because you've shared vulnerable and you've been vulnerable. And that is a blessing that God, I think God wants us. He talks about confession is good for the soul. I mean, all this. So I don't know why. Well, yeah, I know why we're guarded, because we don't want to be hurt. We've been hurt, so we're guarded. But I think so. What Jefferson, to me, he is telling us just before we open our mouth, and God says this multiple times, because he says your tongue is like the rudder on a ship. Think about that. That it controls the whole ship, that little tiny rudder. So before, and Jefferson's saying his way is before we open our mouth, we ought to have done some work. We've ought to have done these heavy lifting. We ought to have our values in line. We ought to know that, there'll be some struggles or challenges, and not back away from them. Do not run from the challenges. Say, well, I know this might not be, I've had to say that in jail, because some of those younger girls are just like, I don't deserve this. I shouldn't be here. Well, that I have to say, well, yeah, we do. We deserve hell. All of us deserve hell. So it's only by God's grace that we have another option besides that. And when you say that, it just kind of calms them down, and they're like, well, yeah, really, she's right. Well, God's right, because that's in the Bible.
That's good and very true. We go towards comfort, and the interesting thing is comfort destroys us essentially. I mean, I think it's fine for a little bit, but I love that you pulled that out about the growth and comfort. They do not coincide. I don't know if you can have any growth in comfort. I feel like all growth is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's different levels of uncomfortability, but I feel like we do need to embrace being uncomfortable and see that as growth and get excited about it
Mm-hmm.
almost. And I love Dr. Good, I think is her name. And I think you've shared videos with me before about her, and she talks about that. That resiliency, it doesn't feel good. Like when you're being resilient, there's it feels messy, it feels uncomfortable, it doesn't feel like it's something good, but it is. And it's almost that we have to rewire our brains, because in our brains we think uncomfortable bad. If
Mm-hmm.
it's And so we just have to rewire that and think uncomfortable, I'm growing. Let me press into this uncomfortable situation, this uncomfortable conversation. Let me press into it, because that's where the growth is. Instead of avoiding it and I want to live in this bubble, but then you're stuck.
I think that is so well said. It reminds me of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where Eustace is a reptile. He's a dragon or whatever, and he can pull the skin off and it doesn't hurt, but he keeps going back to being a dragon. And he wants to stop it. He pulls it off, the scales, but he's still a dragon. He pulls it off. But when Aslan comes in and rips it off and hurts, it's painful, then it stays off. So that's that refiner's fire, that we have to go through the fire, and that's why I think in the Bible it says count it all joy when we go through trials. If we reframe it and count and see a trial as, what is God teaching me, what is God wanting me to know, just like the whole thing with Job and that being a wager and that God was betting that Job could come out of that. God couldn't tell Job, oh, it's going to be all right, Job. It's going to be all right. Job had to trust God. And if we just trust God, like you were talking about, Jonah asked when something wouldn't work, he would say, what is God wanting me to see? What is God wanting me to know? And I told that in jail. I said, when a 10-year-old can do that, guys, we ought to be able to do this. We ought to be able to ask, God, what are you wanting me to know? What am I missing? What am I missing? And there's that humility that we need to have. But I love it. Great.
Yeah. Good points. I love that you tied in the Dawn Treader. I love that connection. Great connection. We are actually currently, that's our read aloud right now. And so that
Cool.
will be, well, down the road, we will be recapping the Voyage of the
Well,
Dawn Treader.
that's something that's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. But I love the connection that you made, that our growth, that what you said would happened with Eustace, it's can be painful but beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that even when Jesus talked about pruning, things being need to be cut off. Well, that doesn't sound like that's just, lovely. That sounds painful. Things
Mm-hmm.
cut off, but then we can grow better. Just like a rose bush, you have to prune those things or they get out of control and ugly and they're not healthy. You got to prune them. You got to keep them trimmed up and
And I think that's what
everything
we
works
need
better
real.
that way.
All of this takes time. And that's why that's why we're doing it in bite-sized pieces, because this takes time, because we're not wired this way. We're just like, we're wired in like the one and done, or I've got a point to prove. Because when you think about it, that's a lot easier than growing a conversation and learning about someone. It's just like, I'm going to prove my point. Bam, bam, bam. Well, that's pretty easy, actually. It's learning about someone. Ask those hard questions and know that it will be messy. No, I don't I don't ever remember going into a classroom where a lot of learning's going on and it being pristine. I don't remember
Mm,
that. When you go into a classroom and there's paper everywhere and there's talking, chattering, everything, a lot of learning can be going on, but it is messy. And we
you're
just
right.
need to embrace that, like mistakes. Wow. Instead of saying, "Oh, I made a mistake," we could say, "Great, I made a mistake. What did I learn?" Because every time you learn something, you know, every day we should want to be making mistakes, because if we don't make mistakes, we're probably not growing. We're in our safe space and we're all comfortable and cozy, but we're stagnant, and we don't want that. Who wants to be stagnant?
You're right. It would really help if we look at it, if we can gamify it even. If you think about like those old school games like the Sonic and Mario and everything,
Mhm.
it's there's a you're trying to get to the next level. And you can't just sit there and get to the next level. You got to be going. You fell off. Dun da 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 da, and then you reset. You respawn and you keep going. And if we can think of it that way, that's uh, like try to get to the next level,
Mhm.
because there is levels, and every like you're talking about, when to get to the next level, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Level up.
But
Level up.
with the next so the and that's the thing, actually, me and my husband were talking about that. The next level has more blessings, has more favor, has more opportunities. It has a
Deeper.
lot of
Deeper.
blessings that come with it, and there's also harder things that come with it.
Mhm.
And
Challenges.
so if you just are looking at, I don't want the harder things, you're going to stay at the level you're at. But you have to
And
say,
probably think you're I know I had a dear friend a long time ago. She had no children and I had 3. She told me all the time how I should be doing it. Like Barney tells Andy Griffith how he should be doing. Well, you messed up here. And Andy one time said, well, don't be talking about that imaginary kid of yours. Because really, I think you have a great quote that you got, Garrett, about Teddy Roosevelt. He said, it's about, you're not even in the arena, but those are the people that are going to really cast stones and stuff like that. That's the sad thing. Instead of supporting each other, but that, like you said, self-promoting, and that's what that's about. Instead of
well,
saying it
they're
will be
comfortable.
messy. Yeah.
When you're in the seats looking down on the people working in the arena and trying things, it's easy to throw those tomatoes. And you're right. The people in the arena do not throw tomatoes at each
Mm-mm.
other, because they're like, "Hey, I understand." So That's a great point. I love that you made that connection because
Well,
the seats are comfortable. We don't wanna
mhm.
be in the seats, we wanna be in the arena,
Well,
and you will have tomatoes thrown at you.
when in the story of Jacob, and I think I talked to you about that, like, it talks about Jacob, he did deceive Isaac and all that when Isaac said, "What is your name?" and he says, "I am Esau." And then later on when he's wrestling with God, "What is your name?" he says, "I am Jacob." He's a different person then than he is, and it talks about him having chutzpah. If you notice the growth in Jacob, that he has that. Does he mess up? Does he? Yes, he does. He messes up, but he has this desire that Esau did not have. He has
Mm,
the fire in the belly because, and you may say, well, how do you know that Esau didn't have it? I said, because he sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. That's why I know. I mean, he didn't take it very seriously, and it was a big deal. So when you think about that, it was like it kind of changes that relationship. Like you're talking about, and after that, when he wrestled with God and he has the limp afterward and everything, he's in a deeper relationship with God, like you said, but there's a lot of responsibility too. So it goes, and he has a lot of struggle. So it's just like all I just think if you look back at those characters in the Bible, like Elijah and all they went through, Nehemiah and everything, like we talked about Job, what did they have in common? What do all those characters have in common? They're moving, they're doing something. Do they make mistakes? Yes, I think the Bible shows us that they fall down, but guess what? They get back up. They get back up, shake the dirt off, and then realign and keep going. And that's what Jefferson's talking about. But he's doing it all in with words. But think about what we say.
you made me think of something when you were talking. It connected with Jamie Winship. I've never thought about that before, but Jacob, so what you said, he claimed to be Esau. That would be like claiming that's a false identity. Then he said Jacob. That's what's the reality, that's the real, but his true identity was Israel. And so that is a great depiction of those three identities that we struggle with. We struggle with either the false, the real, and the truth. It's hard to get to the truth. So, but I love that you pulled that out. I've never thought about it before in that way. That those are kind of the same thing that Jamie Winship talks about.
Mm-hmm. It all comes back. That's why we read.
Well, that is a wrap on chapter 2 of the next conversation.
And we by Jefferson Fisher. And we hope that you will join us in this journey as we are learning to dive deep and grow and align ourselves to, I think, really understand more. And
Have
let's go.
something to learn rather than something to prove. Let's work on that this week.
Yes. And that's your homework, guys. So thanks for dropping by. Let's connect.
To reflect.
Catch you on the next one.